There we go.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of Conversations with Elders. And this morning we have with us Rod Suskin. Before we have a conversation with Rod, I'm going to ask that we take a brief moment to get centered and just breathe and land in that space within. Okay, Rod, good morning.
Good morning, Makgathi. It's so nice to see you.
It's beautiful to see you. I'm so excited. Firstly, that you agreed to come onto the podcast. And secondly, to just be in your space feels very special to me.
It is. And it's, so great that we've got technology that allows us to do that.
Yeah, it feels like you're right inside my room, actually.
Yeah, I feel like it too.
Rod, can I ask you, before we delve into our conversation, to take a brief moment to say a few things about yourself, introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, I'm Rod Suskin, and mostly I practice as an astrologer. I've been an astrologer pretty much all of my life. And even since childhood, and many of the things I do started in childhood. I'm also a sangoma, and graduated as a sangoma when I was 19, which was back in the 80s, in the dark old days. So it's really been my whole life that I've been concerned with people's welfare and their spiritual welfare, and really trying to understand this weird, sometimes wonderful, sometimes terrible journey of the human experience.
The journey of the human experience. I love that.
Yeah, I think it is that.
Yeah, and we find ourselves at one of those big, I'd like to call it a moment, and I don't know how long a moment lasts, but yeah, but here we are, and I know that you have some perspective on what's going on, but also, taking a broader view so that we can understand what we don't understand, maybe see what we are unable to see because of our own limited senses of perception.
Well, for me, one of the things that both being a sangoma and being an astrologer have in common is that they draw on the collective wisdom of human beings, of the human experience. So like you were saying, despite our connectedness to everything, we are living our own lives and experiencing things, as it were, for the first time ourselves over and over again. And for me, one of the most important things I've learned from these paths is that it's not possible to succeed as a human being if you do it entirely on your own. And the first step is that you have to draw on the knowledge and experience of all the humans who have come before you. So in the African cultures, we do that by honoring the ancestors and following the advice from the ancestors and from the past. And in astrology, we do that because astrology is a very ancient system of passing on knowledge. We think of astrology as related to planets supposedly influencing us and all sorts of strange things like that. But at heart, what it really, really is thousands of years ago, our ancient ancestors started telling their stories or recording their stories by linking them to the sky. If they had writing or digital recorders or any of that in like 2000 BC, we wouldn't have that information now because it's not going to last. Nothing written down lasts that long. Nothing digital will last even nearly that long. So amazingly, they found a much better way. What they did is they created archetypal images in the sky by calling the constellations by names. They didn't look like anything, but they were just kind of mnemonics. So they said, like, if we call that bunch over there the ram, even though it doesn't look like a ram, we can start telling stories about metaphors to do with rams, with the individual stars in that picture. And over thousands of years, we weaved our histories and our mythologies and our experience into these stories that we told about the sky. And by passing on those stories, because the sky never changes, we still look at exactly the same sky that they looked at. So by telling those stories and passing them on to generations, because the same sky is there, we can look and see the story and tell the story again. We don't have that broken telephone effect because it's exactly the same sky. And so here we can sit thousands of years later, having that wisdom repeated to us, that what they knew and what they'd experienced and what they understood about themselves and about the human condition. And astrology has managed to survive thousands of years. And so it really, in the end, becomes this enormous body of knowledge about the history and the experience of the human race. More importantly than that, they also developed a system of timing things out of it. So, because what really interested them, the Babylonians who invented astrology realized at some point that things repeat themselves eventually. So if we can figure out how to know when things are going to repeat themselves and what is repeating itself, then we'll be more powerful. They wanted to conquer the world. Then we'll be able to conquer more of the world. And later on, the Greeks would refine that system into understanding how cycles work and so on. And although it looks like, again, some arbitrary system about planets supposedly influencing us, they were really learning about the cycles of life and the cycles of the human experience as well. That as human beings, we go through individual cycles and we go through cycles as a species, as a race of people. It's all human beings. Which, if you think about it, isn't really surprising if you look at the rest of nature. We are comfortable as people to say, look at those plants. They will flower on this date and they will stop flowering on that date and they'll have seed. And look at those animals. They're going to heat at this time and they'll produce this many. And we're very comfortable with looking how nature does all these predictable cycles. We are not so comfortable when we think about ourselves doing that because we like to imagine we're just totally free to do whatever the hell we like. But astrology says, no, you're a creature of nature. You're part of bigger cycles that always happen, that have happened before and will happen again. And you as an individual are just part of the grand sweep of history, if you like. That's what happens to natural creatures like ourselves. So it's a very powerful way to learn about that and to learn to anticipate when are those cycles happening and what do we need to do? What do we need to understand about any particular cycle?
Gosh.
So, it's kind of, to me, it's the most incredible encyclopedia of the human experience that was ever created is the body of knowledge that is astrology and the methods in it. And people worry about the wrong things when they try and test it as this kind of science or test it as this kind of thing. They're missing what the point really is, that it's huge and it was a repository for all our knowledge. We can go back in our cultures and see every human culture has used it in their art, in their religion, in their science, in everything, because it just became the obvious thing to do is that look at the sky, it's not changing and we all see it. And
Sure.
so it joins us together as well.
Right.
And for me, I think even my experience as a sangoma, because when I was initiated in 1982, which I read is a whole other century ago, so let's not even go there. But at first, so I was young, so luckily, when you're young, you just kind of accept things. But being 1982, being a university student, I was acutely aware of the racial discrimination and apartheid oppression in this country. And I was acutely aware of myself as a white person going into this culture that my ancestors had rejected through the oppression of apartheid, but that theirs weren't rejecting me. And that was such a big, powerful thing for me in a lesson about humanity and the ancestors, was that these people didn't seem to really notice or care about the color of my skin. And the fact that my own culture didn't practice things the same way didn't stop them from realizing there's a bigger picture. It seems to me that with my culture, when we look at another culture and we see it's different, we say it's different and they're wrong. That's a very human thing to do. Whereas my experience of the African culture was that it's different, but underneath that, he's still a human being, so we'll solve this problem. There must be a way. And that was why I discovered I wasn't by no means the first white person to be initiated. That had been happening since the 18th century. So, and it was that realization that there's a greater human shared experience that these people were able to understand and use to pass me on the wisdom of ancestors. So, and the lesson, of course, that we learn from African culture is that we're all the same. There isn't one of us who's better or more than the other one. So, as I say, I was fortunate that I got that at such a young age. But I think astrology kind of taught me the same thing, in the sense that, you know, so I had astrology when I was very young, and I was quite a sensitive kid, not in any overwhelming way. It didn't cause me too much trouble, but just sometimes I would, luckily having astrology, I would realize that the reason that person doesn't understand that they're hurting me is because they don't have the same moon as I have. So astrology says the moon is how you react to people. So I could experience this form of compassion that was a little bit like, well, sorry for you, you don't have my moon, I can't blame you for not being sensitive. So astrology was also this equalizer that said we might all be different at the surface, but we all made out of exactly the same ingredients. And you can't blame a person for which ingredients they made out of. So it becomes the individual's responsibility to use those ingredients as best as they can as a human being.
Sure.
And I think this type of crisis makes us see that in our faces, because we immediately realize we're all experiencing the same thing, that there isn't one of us who's different. And looking at our celebrities and prime ministers, and everyone can get the virus, it doesn't matter who you are, is that equalizer that you realize we should be concentrating on what makes us the same, not what makes us different.
Yeah, because I think that one of the things that gets highlighted by the virus is precisely the dichotomies, or that's what we know of ourselves. You know, we are, here is us, and there's nature out there, and here's the death, and perhaps there's the rising up, and here's the collapse. You know, there all these dualities that we find ourselves in. And what you were saying is we have to find the middle way, the midpoint that actually pulls the dualities together. And when we walk that, perhaps somehow we can find some sanity and find something that makes sense.
You know, I'd like to suggest that it isn't that hard to find, because it lies in our humanity, and that is unmistakably what we all share. There's no doubt, whatever your angle is, the fact that we're all human beings is the one thing we'd have to agree on. And so our humanity holds that thing that is identical for all of us. And so that's how we will find that middle way. And that's why, as devastating as it is that something like this virus highlights the differences between us, ideally it's to make us realize that at heart those differences are surface differences, and we have to then respond the same way to each other. Because, and which is, you know, it's difficult, because if you look around you can also still see that the virus for some people will bring out an us and them thing. And that's why it becomes the great equalizer when everyone starts getting affected by it. And that seems to be nature's way of doing things.
Right, right. So earlier on, you mentioned that the task of astrology is to almost draw a map of the human experience, and to highlight patterns, so that we can see that, you know, we've been through this before, and it'll happen again at this particular, you know, the timing of it also can be highlighted. What did, from your knowledge, what did humanity in the past do to walk through a fire such as this and emerge on the other side and thrive and be better and do better?
Well, one of the things, as you're suggesting, is that these fires aren't actually as unusual as we'd like to imagine. We human beings have terribly short memories. That's why we need astrology and ancestors and everything to remind us that we're part of a long thread, that we're not just this individual little life. So this particular cycle astrologically that is associated with this virus occurs about every 37 years, which is not that infrequent. 37 years ago was precisely when the HIV virus was identified and the HIV pandemic was happening. Had just started. The political circumstances at that time were such that, you know, it was suppressed, knowledge was denied, there were all sorts of things because it brought everyone's prejudices to the surface. Because the gay community were the first community to be hit by it by chance, they became the scapegoat, it became the target of oppression and all sorts of ways that, you know, gay people, amongst others, have been treated. And for those reasons, it also took people a long while to understand that it was changing everything about society. But it still is a good example to look back to and understand how these things work. They require us to make very deep but very slow changes, because the changes that happen are very slow. Still, if you think about 1983 to now, for the gay community, how much has changed, it's easy to imagine that maybe that wouldn't have happened that way if HIV hadn't happened that way. We don't know, we'd never know. And not only the gay community, but other people with limited rights, who it helped and everyone understand that in the end, disease doesn't know who you are and will take anyone, and might have helped us change those kinds of ideas. The previous time, 1947, when the same cycle was around, it's the period immediately after the Second World War, and the war was devastating, but what must have been the most devastating thing in the end was the nuclear bomb. When at the end they suddenly realized, oh my God, this is actually, now we are actually capable of destroying ourselves in a heartbeat and destroying everyone else in a heartbeat. And so what's called the nuclear age began, which is a form of an age of uncertainty, which went on for a while in the 40s, until people responded to that by crass commercialism, which is what the 50s was. It just became more about, okay, well, let's just make more stuff. So there's never a guarantee that human beings are going to take the right path out of something like this. And that's why we all have to keep on working on trying to understand the bigger picture, not the individual picture. You know, for me, I think where we go wrong so often is when we focus things as about being about ourselves. And even when we talk about what am I supposed to learn from this, or what should I do about it, for me, I think what this virus is trying to tell us, or what this experience is trying to tell us, is that we mustn't think of ourselves as ourselves all the time. We've got to understand that we're a collective, that we're a species, that we're a human race, that we are not individuals. That is what nature is desperately trying to show us. And, you know, in restoring her balance, which I think she's doing, she's just trying to keep the planet on track. It's a harsh reminder that we are individually dispensable. As a whole, maybe not. As a whole, we function as part of the balance of this planet. So everything that we've done to the planet, which is causing it eventually to react like this, that to me is what we need to learn about. So this cycle, you know, astrologers said for ages, as long as I can remember, 2020 is World War III. We've always predicted it was going to be World War III because we always knew the cycle was coming. And it's interesting that very few, I think I now know of 2 astrologers who did say that there was an epidemic coming along with it or with the war. But everyone was absolutely certain it was World War III. I don't know any astrologer who didn't think it was World War III in 2020 for years already. And it was kind of a joke as it approached, and it didn't look like it, and it looked like, oh no, those nuclear wars don't happen anymore, and all of that. And I thought, nah, it's going to be fine. And when Trump attacked Iran in early January, we were sort of thinking, oh dear. and maybe this is it, and maybe it is happening. And when nothing came of that, astrologers got worried because they thought something's going to have to happen. We know that it's happening. So that big thing, we all, we knew that something was coming along to squeeze us. And what that cycle is all about is power and powerlessness. And so the powerlessness, the real powerlessness is our powerlessness in the face of nature in all its manifestations, from viruses to natural disasters on the grand scale, which we keep on forgetting, because one of the things we've done since 1947 is we've increasingly separated ourselves from the world out there. The technology of the 50s was technology that taught us to rise above nature and not be affected by nature. Heaters and air conditioners and all these things that isolate us from how the natural world actually works. And in the end, all those other, the chemical technologies and all those things that increasingly did that. And so we now face the fact, the harsh reminder that no matter what we do, nature is more powerful than us. It's fascinating to me how so many people are taking refuge in conspiracy theories and blaming rich people or governments or all the usual targets. And that's because rich people and governments and whoever else are powerful. They are manifestly powerful. They have the actual symbols of power for our culture, for our country, for our human culture, I should say, rulership and money. And so people, in feeling powerless, blame the people who are powerful, instead of realizing it's correct that I'm powerless, but it's not Bill Gates or the government or whoever's got, because that power is just as artificial and meaningless as any other power in the face of nature. Any one of them can be taken out by a virus or a hurricane. So understanding that that isn't where power lies. The correct response is not to point fingers at the powerful people, is to say, actually, this teaches me that those aren't the powerful people. That a tiny little invisible thing is more powerful that came from nature. And so it should really make us revise our understanding of where does real power lie. It's not in human things like money and government. It's the fact that as a collective, we're an incredibly powerful species. As an individual, we tend to use that power over each other. But as a collective, we're incredibly powerful. Then you can look at us as this evolved race and say it's incredible what we did, rising out of, all the atoms for millions of years. But when one individual takes it, it becomes a problem. And I think that's what nature's trying to teach us.
Sure, it's a powerful lesson, and it's not an easy lesson to be going through, because it does bring a lot of pain. It does bring a lot of loss. It is challenging. It's an invitation, but it's a challenging one. And I really appreciate the example that you gave about how the gay community was able to benefit from the advent of the HIV/AIDS virus, and how that has created a completely new perspective in the rest of humanity, in different societies, in accepting and in opening ourselves up to what is different from us, and being able to embrace, or certainly at least to be able to look at, if not embrace just yet, but at least look at and recognize that this is another human being. And so what you're saying is that the COVID virus is also taking us through an evolution and bringing us to something new of ourselves. And you've used the word connection, that we're not separate from each other, but that actually it's our interdependence that nature is trying to remind us of.
Especially since, just use as a small possible example, because it's too soon to tell, but one of the things that this virus is challenging us to understand is racism. Because firstly, this painting it as the Chinese virus, just because that's the first place it starts, is like saying the gay plague, because the first person who had it was gay for HIV. So it's obviously just as false to call it a Chinese virus, because the virus doesn't have a nationality. But in the end, so it will raise separation about that at first, like it's in countries like America or whatever, where there are increasing signs of that kind of racism. But in the end, its lesson becomes you all the same. So it will help us eventually break down the ideas of nationalism and racism and those kind of things which separate us from each other. As I say, for me, the great lesson of African culture was that we're not separate. No matter what you do, we're not separate. Or you can call it culture, you can call it country, you can call it color of your skin. In the end, we're not separate. You know, the African thing of we all bleed red under the skin. So that is the truth, I think, that this particular iteration of a virus is going to help us, or it's a truth that's going to help us understand. And hopefully, in the long run, if not the short run, to begin to change how we handle each other. Because, you know, a lot of this, I think, is about how we handle the planet. But where does even that come from? So, you know, part of how we handle the planet is our disregard for and separation from nature. But a lot of it is to do with our competition with each other and with capitalism. I don't want to get into like a political thing about capitalism, but I think everyone does understand now, especially, that capitalism, certainly as it's manifest, is a very destructive force, both in terms of nature and in terms of interrelationships, because it's made us all compete with each other, and it's okay to do that. It's okay to ship my product halfway around the world and burn a zillion tons of carbon just so that the Chinese don't get there first. You know, it allows for that kind of thinking, and all of those things which become this, the way that we see difference between ourselves are being broken down just that way, and it'll force us to change those behaviors. So I think a lot of how we damage the planet is related to how we treat each other, not only how we treat the planet. And that's what's going to change, and also how we treat other species. You know, I'm not so sure that we're going to learn that one, because, you know, the Chinese have been saying literally for thousands of years, eating wild animals causes disease, and no one seemed to listen to that, at least for themselves. So it's like, well, okay. But now, on the scale we have today and the understanding we have today of how what really does happen, maybe it's going to be the thing that makes us realize you can't treat nature that way, you can't treat another species that way, and you can't treat your own species that way.
And in closing, I'm just, you know, when you were speaking, the word that came up for me was compassion, and deep compassion is required right now, and compassion and courage, actually, those two words that we need to be courageous as the human race to challenge the frameworks that we have used to look at the world and to live our lives, and to, you know, the whole thing of competition and winner takes all, and that when we are courageous enough to recognize that it's not about the either or, but it's the interconnectedness, it's the interrelationship amongst us that will assist humanity to thrive, and all of us, not only humanity actually, but the whole planet, and all her beings can then thrive.
And you know, the great thing about that is that it's an accessible and a doable lesson. I don't need special equipment, I don't need special knowledge, I don't even need special technology, even as much as technology connects us. I just need another human being and access to another human being. Although, as I've said, this is a collective experience and a collective lesson for us as a human race, each of us as individuals can do something about it by turning away from individuality, by saying this isn't about my consciousness growing, it isn't about me learning a lesson, it isn't about me, it's about me realizing that every other person is as much a part of me as the cells of my body are. And we are all cells in the body of God or nature. And so each one of us is just as important. And so each of us can learn the lesson in terms of how we treat other human beings. That's all we need to do. As I said, we don't need knowledge, we don't need technology to do that. We just need interaction with other human beings once we get that back. Because there's the big lesson. Why are we isolated? Well, at the very least, we're learning what happens when you can't see and touch another human being. How painful is that lesson? And that's going to help us remember that when we do get to see and touch not only our loved ones, but all the other people in the world, that we've got to treat them with that humanity and that compassion, to understand that all of us are going through the same experience now. Some of us have it worse than others, and that's teaching us about this inequality that we've created. But all of us are going through the same experience of having to consider what happens when I can't access other human beings. So I'm hoping that that will give us the chance to learn that if I can treat just every person I encounter, if I can treat one other person with the true compassion and humanity that I want for myself, then it's not about me, it's about us. And if everyone keeps on doing that, then we'll get the lesson that actually everything is about us, not about me.
Sure. Thank you, Rod. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
For
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Of course, of course. And I'm taking away that it's not just about me, but it's about us and how I can contribute positively to that. Thank you, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
And the same to you. Look forward to seeing you next time in person.
Yes.
All the best.